isn't it BlackRock, is there a way to calm that down where they're purchasing all and they're driving up the cost of real estate? You walk around New York City, there are buildings that are full of empty apartments because it's money laundering from people overseas that are stashing money, and it's raising the cost of living for the entire city.
That's exactly right. And you know, if like, I'm actually not a Ron Paul guy. One of my dear friends is a big Ron Paul guy, but like, I've kind of come around to the Ron Paul argument. I don't fully agree with it, but the criticism of the Federal Reserve that makes the most sense to me is that it gives massive corporations a lower cost of money than the average American, right? So part of the reason BlackRock has been able to buy all these homes is you ask, well, what is BlackRock borrowing at? Right, what rate are they borrowing at? Because the average American right now, I think the average mortgage interest rate is somewhere around 7% right now. Okay, BlackRock's borrowing at like 1.5, 2.5%, right? So if they're paying a much lower cost for debt than the average American, then they have a huge advantage. They buy up all the homes, they jack up all the costs, and again, going back to the Jeffersonian idea of Americans as owners and as citizens in their own country, well, what happens when BlackRock owns your home and say they say you're not allowed to own a firearm because we own this home, you don't own this home? Okay, there goes the Second Amendment. What if they say, well, for all residents in our places, we don't want you to put up yard signs for certain political candidates? Well, there goes the First Amendment. Yeah. There's a connection, there's a very deep connection between the idea of American citizenship, the full idea, and the liberties that actually make American society such a cool place to live. And if we turn everybody into renters, we're going to destroy that. I mean, I think that, like...
Here's where you're wrong, though. People really like these shows where people buy $20 million homes, like Selling Sunset. Most isn't that as good as owning a home? Because there's 30 shows about people buying mansions, and people get to watch them. So you don't have to cut grass. You can watch somebody else buy a house. But that is what's happening, by the way.
Yeah. You can live in a pod and eat your roasted crickets, but watch other people living the American dream.
People do that. There are people watching people buy houses for tens of millions of dollars who they themselves cannot afford their rent.
Yeah, it's almost like the shows have the purpose of distracting us from the fact that material living standards in this country have been stagnating for many years.
Yeah. And you address that by perhaps, is it the federal funds rate? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, what I think is, and I've actually talked to a number of, the president has a very dear friend by the name of Steve Witkoff, who's a very smart guy. He's one of the most successful real estate investors in the world. And Steve has all of these interesting ideas. And it's hysterical because Steve is, I assume, a multi-billionaire. He's certainly very rich, but he has all these ideas for how to make it so that ordinary Americans are paying the same amount for debt as the big guys, right? Because if you're paying 7% and the big guys are paying 2%, ordinary Americans are always going to get screwed. There are a lot of different ways you could do that. I mean, you could just basically statutorily not allow BlackRock to access the federal funds directly. You could do all these things to lower the cost of capital for normal Americans. There's like a lot of ways to address the problem, but it's a problem. And the fact that we're not talking about that, instead we're talking about, like Donald Trump is a threat to democracy because he said that if people riot after he wins, then we should not allow that, which is of all the criticisms of Donald Trump, the craziest one is, he said at a rally that if people riot after the election, law enforcement should prevent that from happening. And they're like, oh, that's a threat to democracy. It's like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
That's common American law enforcement. But it's funny, man. People are more focused on that. The media is more focused on that than on the fact that we have a set of economic policies that are turning, like, our generation. I mean, I assume you're about my age.
Yeah.
Like, our generation, especially younger, permanent paupers, permanent renters in the country that their parents and grandparents built. And I see these polls that say that young people, usually vote for Democrats, but maybe they're more pro-Trump this cycle than they were last cycle. My argument to them is, aren't you sick of politicians talking about fake bullshit instead of the fact that you can't afford a home and that you won't be able to raise a family because you won't be able to afford their healthcare costs and their housing costs? Like, let's talk about real stuff. Say what you will about Donald Trump. Say what you will about me.
Right.
He talks about real things that affect real people.
Is the happy medium them owning a home in the Ukraine? You know what I mean? Because you're making a lot of points that are going to be tough.